Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Hackerschool. So I'm from EML, and he's from Hackers. Thank you to our hacker teams for hosting us today. So today we are doing a short workshop on the introduction to electronic music production, or even just music production in general. Because okay, so here's a fun fact for everyone here today. Actually, do you know that the majority of music you listen to nowadays is electronically produced? Doesn't matter what genre it is. Your favorite artists like like garage band artists or like maybe some like soul or jazz artists, and they also record and they put it into the same kind of audio systems that we use. So more generally it's about music production. um, so who am I am the current president of Electronic Music Lab, which is the producer club in NUS. So I'm a year 2 CS major. Anyone else for CS over here? Damn, we're in the school of computing, guys. But yeah, I love like cross genre, fast, experimental electronic music, and J-pop, hardcore, and playing a lot of video games. I somehow extent got myself involved with many different CCAs this year, and I'm dying from lack of sleep. So, but it's a voluntary lack of sleep, so I'm quite happy about that. And she's my vice president.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm Year 3 Info Systems, and I'm the current Vice President of EML. I focus more on orchestral music, artcore, video game music, all that. And I suck at coding even though I'm in IS. And I'm also still addicted to Genshin Impact even now for some reason.
Woo, so that's my vice pres, and Okay, so today we are here to learn how to make the computer go beep, bop, beep, bop. So basically, like how to make the computer make sound. Okay, so we are from, as I mentioned earlier, we are from Electronic Music Lab. So what we mainly do is that we are a producer club in NUS. So our members get to, perform and produce their own original piece. It can be of any genre, any kind of style that they want. And, our instructions is in Ableton Live, but however, that is the skills you learn from using Ableton Live, for example, is transferable to other DAWs, or like basically the thing you use for like audio editing as well. Like it doesn't just matter like the fact that we use a specific one, because often because of the way the industry worked, right, all these different groups, they end up implementing the same functionalities in order to competitively compete with each other. So yeah, our session is every Saturday from noon to 2 p.m. No prior experiences required. Just you to be passionate about making music and coming for our sessions. So as I mentioned earlier, what is a DAW? So a DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. So okay, have you guys seen like for when you do video editing, right? Any of you use like these like softwares before? So like non-linear editing, right? So like you see like got the nice like track, got the nice like like all the different stuff you can put inside. Yeah, so like for music we have something similar. It's called a DAW, Digital Audio Workstation, and these are some of the common ones like Ableton Live and FL Studio. And it's like if you look at them, right, they're actually quite similar in the sense that they contribute to like there's a track. There's a track here, there's like the time on top, and then over here like it's a bit cut off, but like they have like a bunch of like stuff that your stuff that you can put inside. Yeah. It's actually a surprisingly similar workflow from my personal experience having used both. And so why do we use DAWs? Because it's a okay. So it is a form of non-destructive audio editing. Have any of y'all heard of like this thing called Audacity, or like similar softwares? Those are called destructive audio editing because it edits directly onto like the sound. It doesn't really like you can't really like split a bunch of tracks, like edit a bunch of media, etc. Right? So the thing about DAWs is that it supports like a lot of functionalities such as like live editing, live recording, or even like like recording of effects or parameters as well. So like they basically allow a lot of flexibility, especially because of the use of like things like these things we call plugins. So these are like your instruments or effects. And then also like there's also people actually make a lot of like massive libraries for like these things also. Like okay, any of y'all here like code in like say like Python or Java for that 90% of content comes from the libraries, right? The same is true for DAWs. People make a lot of like digital, synthesizers and libraries, sound libraries just specifically for DAWs. And so today, but the thing is like a lot of these DAWs, their prices may be expensive. I mean, some of them are much cheaper than others, but like it is certainly an investment. But so aside from today, we are using a free DAW called BandLab. It uses WebAssembly. It's quite limited in what you can do, but it's good enough for today, and it's quite easy to learn. So as a side note, right, for hardware, right, Macintosh actually has the lowest latency if you care about that, because the thing about Mac is that because of how them as a company worked, right, they are able to, because they don't need to accommodate like, other people working on, other like products, etc. So they can like really like optimize their, process. So they have a very, very low latency. And okay, so for people who use Linux, however, this one is more important, more for people who use Linux, because Linux unfortunately does not have support from all plugins or DAWs. Like a lot of people, they tend to not really like take the time to make it support on Linux as well. So yeah, but I'm gonna be honest, right? Because I myself use Windows. In terms of latency, right? If your music doesn't sound good, right, it's more often a you issue. Like to get to the point where you start worrying about that, right? It's like quite a bit down the line. And also like MacBooks are quite expensive. I don't think like your mileage may vary basically. It depends on what you think is quite more important. But yeah, no shame to anyone. Just that to take note is that if you use Linux, you should be prepared that a lot of the softwares that you may see online may not exactly work. So yeah, so finish. So yeah, so now let's go through what audio and MIDI is. So audio is like sound, right? It's like a bunch of pressure waves in the air. So okay, so like in music, right? So in our DAWs, right, the audio is actually usually like different things like sound or recording that we generate from the computer. So like these things have this thing called sampling rate. So it's like how fine it is, because like okay, so here's the thing about a computer, right? We know it's like bits, right? It's ones and zeros, right? You can't exactly contain the full information of say like a column of air moving around, right? So as a result, we need to break it down into like tiny little bits so they can be stored. Then the thing is, this is what you call a sampling rate. So human hearing can hear from approximately 20 hertz to around 20,000 hertz. Okay, some people can hear a bit higher, but honestly, right, it's not that important. So as a result, right, we typically sample it around like 44.1 or 48K hertz. So the reason for this is because we want it to be more than twice the signal bandwidth, so that when we reproduce the sound, right, after we generate it into audio, it doesn't lose any quality. So like imagine like, okay, what it's very, let me just quickly illustrate this. So like imagine like an actual like sound wave is like this, right? In your computer, we have to change it to be like, right? So the thing is like if the steps are too big like this, right, your ears, because humans being able to hear like quite fine around 20K hertz, our ears can hear the fact that it's like this rather than this. So so the idea was that we basically need like at least it to be twice the frequency that we are trying to make. So anyways, yeah, so for audio there's actually several different formats that we generate it in. So for example, a wave file or FLAC or ALAC is considered a lossless kind of conversion. So typically like the audio file, right, like the sound will not have any like compression or loss of detail. But for things like MP3, which is I believe most of you guys use in your daily listening experience, is however a form of lossy compression, because it loses some of the details. So the thing is like normally when we work with music, right, we usually try to stick it with WAV wave files, because it does not have any loss. But the thing is, typically wave files tend to be a bit bigger, so that's why typically like online people you hear MP3 a lot. But yeah, so normally when we do collaborations, we work on these wave files as well. It's okay. MP3 files, right? It works, but like the problem with MP3 is that typically like you only use it for like when you put it onto like streaming services, etc. Cause like imagine you lose a bit of detail every time you pass the MP3 around, right? Down the line, it's going to add up. But audio is very, very hard to actually like work with. Like imagine, right, you want to make a song with like a piano sound, right? So what you do is you go to the concert hall, you take out your recorder, you start recording the grand piano, and then afterwards you cut it down to like each and every single tiny millisecond. You try to arrange it into a new way. That's gonna take you eons, right? It doesn't make sense, right? Or like imagine like you go to your computer and then you tell it, okay, I want this sine wave, right? And then I want to stack this other wave on top. I want to stack this other wave on top. And I wanted to modify it like this, like that. Like it's very, very impossible to work with. That's why we need things like abstraction, things like MIDI, things like effects, notes, etc. So unless you're like people like this, right? Good luck to you if you try to actually make music in like low level. It is possible, certainly, and actually the way that synthesizers and work at a very low level, like we basically tell a computer to make the waves, but like the thing is, for most music production purposes, you don't really worry about that. So what is MIDI? MIDI is Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So MIDI 1.0 was actually created in 1985. So like they slowly expanded on it over time. It's an early example of open source programming as standard, and it eventually became like an industry standard because like it basically standardized the way that musical information is communicated between devices. So like imagine before that, right? You wanted like you format your music as like a specific format, right? And then you plug it into a different like system and it stops working. That's like problematic, right? You want it to be consistent. Like if I have this specific like bunch of notes, I want to be able to play out any kind of system that I want. So it encodes it as like either status or data. So like note on, note off, pitch, velocity. So like A440. Any of you here actually play in like an orchestra before? Or like done any form of music before? Okay, never mind. So you guys wouldn't know the significance of A440. Basically, A440 has historically been the note that humans have rooted our music around. That's why when you hear music say like tune to A432, A442, for example, they are referring specifically to the note A4, the middle A. So this is actually note number 69 by chance. So for those of you who are very immature, congratulations. And yeah, so it actually makes sense though, because like A440 just so happens to be like around the 69th note of the human hearing range, which is around like 10 octaves, because human hearing range is approximately like 20,000 hertz, which like, okay, so for each octave is like half, and it's from 20 to 20,000, which is around like 2 to the power of 10 multiplication. So yeah, we basically get 120 notes in 12 ET. Yeah, it's okay. Alright, another side note is that this actually fits nicely into bytes as well, because as you notice, it's actually nicely eight exact bits of information, bytes of information to encode. Okay. So basically, because of what MIDI, it allows us to think purely in terms of music. So like we don't need to worry about, oh my gosh, is this a square wave? Is this a sine wave? How am I going to put the sound around? Instead, you're just like, okay, so this is like musically, this is like an A2, this is like a B2, this is like a G2. And actually, okay, so despite MIDI being industry standard, there are like specific tuning files for instruments as well, because as we mentioned earlier, MIDI just specifies a specific note. So actually, depending on the software or like the exact VST you use or plugin you use, you can potentially tune the other systems as well. Just a side note, if you ever think about exploring that. But yeah, normally we basically visualize it in this system, which is the piano roll. So yeah, you'll see that again later. Okay, so now time. Okay, so have all of you actually went and set up your BandLab account, like I was instructed in the message? Okay, good. Okay, so everyone, it's finally time for you to take out your computers. It's finally for the fun part. You'll get to like make your own songs. Okay, not exactly your own song. That's gonna take too long. Make your own loops. The URL is going to submit like this later. Yeah. Okay, so this is the BandLab demo track. Yeah, okay. Right, so if any of y'all need help later, you can find my vice president. She can help you with the BandLab. But yeah, so okay, so I'm just going to briefly explain what it is using this nicely done up project demo right in front of me. So this is the demo project. So like as you can see, right, this here is our audio files. So this one, and this one, these are audio files. So like some of them are rendered, like for example, these are rendered inside the system. But these, for example, are what I mentioned earlier, the MIDI. So it's like the notes instead of an audio. And then these are what we will call like a sample. So it's like something like, you know, a specific sound that we take from outside. So like, for example, like, I mean, one example of a similar sound could be like, for example, you know, like a crash, right? Have you seen like those cymbals? So if you do like a cymbal, right, and you reverse, right, you should get a nice like riser, because like, so basically what a riser is like this sound that's like gets loud, it's like. So the thing is that with the cymbal is that because of the way that, you know, sound tapers off, it gets similar effect if you reverse it. Then yeah, this is, as you see over here, this thing, it says sampler, right? So, you know, this means that it's a sample, but yeah. So, right, so like, okay, so let's get into like, for example, okay, so let's get to like a bit of music, right? So like, for example, in the project demo file, right, you see these notes, right? It's like, okay, so like okay, so, you know what, let me just start a new file. Okay, so let's start a new project. So let's go through the steps of how to make a song. So like, for example, in this specific session, we're just going to make like a 8 to 16 bar loop. So it's not very complicated. So first thing you want to do is you want to, you know, click. Okay, so you already added a track for me, but you want to click add track, and you want to choose, you know, virtual instrument or drum machine, because in this case, you know, I don't believe anyone here is came with like, you know, those like large microphones ready to record, right? Anyone who's so enthusiastic to do that? Yeah, I expect so. So the thing is, you click virtual instrument. So actually for BandLab, right, this sampler, guitar, bass, or video, voice, audio, these like are usually like audio stuff. So like if you were to like, for example, have like a audio recording setup, you might use these. I think sampler, you can put some MP3 files in it. So I think that one is a bit different. Yeah. So first you click on your instrument. Then afterwards, you want to, you know, wait, why is there no sound? Okay, hello? Oh, it's weird. Yeah, it should be okay. That's why it's, because it works here, but for some reason here it's silent. I don't know. Okay, so like okay, so in music, right, how songs usually work is this thing we call like chord progression, or like, you know, chords. So what a chord is that it's arrangement of okay, so how music in Western music theory works mainly is around this idea called harmonics, because people in the West, right, they decided that, you know, that instruments are mainly like, you know, strings or tubes, for example. Like, think of an orchestra. What instruments are there? A violin, that's a string instrument. A cello, that's a string instrument. A flute, you know, oboe, those are all like pipes. And so basically what they do is they create this thing called like a standing wave. It's basically, so like as a result, it creates like these like things called harmonics, which are basically like oscillations that are like nice, like multiples above the original like frequency. So which is what the entirety of the Western music theory is built around. So as a result, right? So for example, like if I were to do like, you know, a C6 and a C7 over here, for example. Okay, why is that? Okay, really, serious question. Why is there no sound? I guess that fixed that. I don't know what happened, but okay. Okay, so as you can see, right, these two notes, right, they sound quite similar, right, when you hear it. This is because they are exactly two. Well, this is because the C7, right, is a multiple of 2 in frequency above the C6. So it creates like this, like, you know, nice consonants in like their frequencies overlapping. So it sounds like the same note. But then, for example, okay, that's why, for example, right, in Western music theory, we often do this thing where like it's 1, 3, and 5. So this is like this is what we call a 1 chord. Wait, what? Hello? Yeah, so you can hear that, you know, the 5 in this case, right, has a 3:2 ratio to the original. So like so it's quite consonant with the sound as well. The multiples of the frequency lines up quite nicely. And then, you know, so this is a chord. So like for example, the next chord would be, you know, a second chord. So in this case, C major, so it's quite simple, or there's no sharps or flats. So it just be like, and afterwards, yeah, and then so on and so forth. So like, as you can see, right, different chords have a different feel to it as well, right? So like, for example, right, if I were to do, it sounds incomplete, right? Because like, you can still feel a bit of like tension in the music, like dum. It's like a bit of, you know, this is called 4 chords, or like, and basically what it does is that there's a bit of tension in the music because it wants to resolve to like a, you know, back to like, you know, a 1 chord or like a 5 chords. So like, for example, if I were to do, I'll now add the first chord. Now it sounds like complete, right? Because it does this thing in music what we call resolve. So like normally when you like write a melody, for example, right, you want to, you know, basically progress the sound, right, and then, you know, build tension. You want to resolve them again. Like this is something that, you know, you slowly pick up as you learn more and more. And so, for example, over here, let's see what I do. I might want this to be a. Yeah, and then like so on and so forth. So like okay, so in music there's this thing we call loops, right? So for example, I do something like this, right? I'm quite happy, right? So now what I can do is I can set it on repeat. What? And then afterwards I just drag it. You see it repeats, right? So like for example, if I really like this for some reason, I can just do like this and that. So this is what we call a loop, and this is actually especially important when it comes to drums. So why is it that, you know, drum forms this thing called rhythm? It's because it's regularity, right? It's regular. So, you know, especially for things like drum loops, for example, you might really want to, you know, do this thing called like a drum loop. So you want to repeat the drum cycle a few times before changing it. So now we'll move on to rhythms. Oh, it's loud. Okay. Actually, no, I should turn it in the output routing. Wait, which one is it currently routed to? The 1 and 2, right? Yeah, it's 1 and 2. Okay. Okay, so like for example, this is okay. So this is called a drum machine. So like, as you can see, right, when you have it running, right, you see this thing this light up bar. So this light up bar basically indicates like which beat the drum machine is currently on. And drum machines typically, they basically are in 4/4 like semiquavers. There is a way to, you know, change that as well, but I'm not really used BandLab that much, so I don't really know how to do it on this. So we're just gonna stick with 4/4 for today. Okay, let's pick something. Let's go with DMB. So like, okay, so when you bring up the instrument, for example, you see all this bass, right? You just click play, and then you see if you like the sound that comes out. So like in this case, I would say, okay, let's go this one. Anyways, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna delete this because I don't think this will fit that myself. Okay, so normally what I want to start with, you want to start with like a bass beat, because like normally that sets like the regular rhythm for the song. So like, wait. Like for example, this is like a low rhythm, and then you want to add like a bunch of higher notes. So like. Wait, oops. Afterwards, you just stack up your higher layers, and afterwards you get like a more complex drum like this, for example. But you can always just change the. If it's like, for example, you decide that I don't really like the sound anymore, you can also just change the drum pad again. Oh, actually, I like this one. Yeah. And then so this is like drum beat A, and then what normally happens is that it loops like this. Okay, so in BandLab they gives you the option to loop and also to create a new one. So for example, I want a different drum beat, right? Because like let's suppose like after 4 bars I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm tired of this drum beat, it's repeating so many times, it's gonna be stuck in my head now for the rest of the week, right? So you're like, okay, let's change the drum beat up. So what you do is normally you start with the same bass drum beat, and then like you want to this thing called variation. So you want to add something different to it. So like right now this is playing the same thing, right? So what you want to do is you want to add something. Maybe you're like, okay, now right, I don't want really like the do 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 sound. I want maybe more like the high sound, right? Or maybe I like more of the kick drums, for example. So for example, I can like and then afterwards you get what is called variation. This is the original. Wait. Hold up. Wait, give me a moment. Oh wait. Oh wait. I forgot to switch the pattern. Oops. Okay, but you can copy this. And then afterwards, for the drum machine that I switch the pattern to B. Afterwards, so like now we add the instrument on top. So So anyway, I'm just gonna make a 4-bar loop. Now loop this. So now let's suppose I want to make a variation. I just change up the notes here. So let's suppose I wanted to go up this time. Okay, so like now for example, I have a very simple 4-bar loop with like a basic drum beat and like a basic melody. So like so yeah, now it's your turn to try on your laptops. You can also come out play around on my computer also if you haven't brought a laptop or Okay, so yeah. Okay, so the thing is we actually have a entire so this link here. So like feel free to upload your track after you finish working on them there as well. Okay, right. Okay. Okay, right. Okay, so would anyone want to okay, so I believe that I may have went a bit fast there. So would anyone want to volunteer to come up here and try for the rest? Come any volunteers? Anyone want to volunteer to try? Okay, sure. Okay, everyone give her a round of applause. Okay, so would you, yeah. Yeah. So like we get to show the rest. I mean, okay, so right, so feel free to add your own addition to the track. I mean, you want to add like a new drum beat or like a new melody, etc. Anything is fine.
How do I make a new like a new effect?
Okay, so for example, you want to add a new track, you click here, and then you click virtual instruments or drum machine.
Okay.
For this one is called what I call a sampler, and then for these 3 it's recording, which we did not bring any recording equipment, so that's kind of pointless. So yeah. So for example, this is a drum machine, but I think 1 drum beat is enough. So yeah, let's go with virtual instrument. So okay, so over here you get to choose which instruments you want. So you play this thing for a preview, and then afterwards, then these are the different categories. So like for example, if I want percussions, synths. Yeah, just play around. Find like a sound you like. Ooh, okay, that's interesting.
Then I could just fill it.
Okay, not yet. You need to first create a track. So like, one way to do is double click. Another way to do is right click and then afterwards click create region. So afterwards now you have what's called a piano roll. Then now you can add your notes. Well, actually, unironically, you can actually turn this to a texture. Okay, so now it sounds quite messy, right? Because you're kind of just randomly adding notes, right? Okay, one way to do it is to quantize it, which is to, for example, this says 1/4 over here. So like, okay, this especially applies if you, for example, play a live instrument to record, like the MIDI data. You can often get a lot of misalignment. So what I want to do is click quantize over here. But in this specific, okay, so like for example, you can click quantize 1/4. So you quantize everything to semi-quave. Okay, wait, select everything first, quantize, and you look, now it's sure. Let me just Control Z and it should be back. Yeah, okay, so this is actually something interesting though. You can actually make something that can be actually, okay, so this is actually a perfect segue into effect, demonstrating effects. Do you want to add a few more random notes here? Okay, so this thing on top is called a loop length. So right now I have loop enabled. Okay, right now I have loop enabled. So you'll loop like this rap part. So like, for example, this thing is where it ends. So for example, if I just want to loop this part, I can just do this. Shift it in front all the way to the front. And actually for this specific case, right, this bunch of notes, right, actually I felt there's something very interesting you can do with this. So this introduces the idea of effect. So you look at the bottom here, there's instruments, effect, and MIDI effect, and MIDI editor, right? So you go to effects, you want to add something. I feel like this thing might actually go very nice with like, as like, some kind of texture, right? So I want to make this a bit of like a wash. And the EQ. Like a sizzle, right? Okay, so like these are effects. So like okay, so for this specific like software, right, they actually simplify effects a lot. So like you can just play around with the knobs and like see what sounds they make. So in this specific case, I kind of already know what I'm doing, so just turn this into like a wash. Yeah, but yeah. So yeah, this is more or less the basics of how to make a sound. Okay, so like let's suppose we just put it mute. Okay, so this is another important function. It's called mute and solo. So you see here this thing called mute M, right? It stands for mute. So you mute the track. So in this specific case, right, you see, right, this kind of does fit the soundtrack. Like it's like some kind of like ambient, like for example, one of those like dark jungle beats, or like like maybe like some like horror movie trail or something. So like for example, you hear by itself, like it's like this like very deep sci-fi-ish sound, right? So yeah, you want to build your sound around that feeling. So you want it to be more coherent. So for example, like this upbeat melody over here just no longer works with this sound, for example. And also because they're not in the same key as well. Okay, so in music we have this thing called a key, right? So it's basically a bunch of interval of notes, right? That, like I mentioned earlier, basically lines up the harmonics nicely. So anyways, okay, so like for example, this, okay, so right now maybe it's a bit too so maybe like it's a bit too peaking to low, so it's like clashing with the piano, for example. So something I can do is, for example, I can just move these up, and like maybe a rumble is better. Oh, yeah. Okay, but I mean, this is a bit hard to work around with, for example, but you know, just something for you to play around with.
Is there a way to get a copy of that like before the wash and then like work on it myself?
Sure. I mean, okay. So like, okay, what I just asked, for example, is okay. So this brings us to the next thing called exporting. So if you go to project here, you can see this thing called downloads. They can like download tracks or like the entire mix. So like for example, you want to download this specific track. Right. So you go through this process of compiling the sound. Wait, does not have export as MIDI. Some projects, filter. Wait, does it not have export as MIDI? Wait, BandLab don't have export as MIDI. Okay, never mind. Okay. So it appears that BandLab does not have an export as MIDI functionality, so you'll have to work on that as like a stem. Okay, so like it'll be like a wave file. I mean, you can still play around with it, but you won't be able to edit the notes and stuff.
Okay, cool. Do you have it as like with no wash on it?
Yeah, I removed the wash.
Perfect, thank you.
But yeah, okay, so now everyone can work on something on their own on their computers. Make anything you want. Like as long as it sounds good, it's good enough. Like here's the bottom line, right? People talk a lot about theories, right? But do you really think that when writing a song or like when your favorite artists write a song, or when Beethoven or like Debussy is writing their music, even like back then, like do you think they're thinking about, oh my gosh, the frequencies need to align, we need to like write this specific note? No, they won't. They're just putting in notes that they think sound nice together, which I think is the most important thing. Make music that you enjoy, music that you like. Okay, but anyways, yeah, this is more or less the brief crash course on it. Yeah, everyone give her a round of applause. Yeah. Can I have your Teddy?
So you see there's like a bunch of selections here, right? I said I wanted to start with the drum, so I'm just gonna click on drum machine. It's gonna like auto load something here, and like all of these beat starters, all that. Okay, I'm just gonna use one of these presets because I'm lazy. So I'll just press on the basic one. And you see after I press it, stuff has already loaded, right? So I'm just not going to do anything and click the play button to hear how this sounds. Okay, so I can hear how this sounds now. Is it loud enough? You all can hear it, right? Is it a bit too soft, too loud, or anything? Okay, okay. Yeah, so basically, this is what the system gave me. And now I'm gonna stop it because I think it's not good enough. So as you can see, there's like a bunch of keys and like pictures over here, right? If I press the corresponding key on my laptop's keyboard, it's gonna make that sound so I can preview what I'm actually gonna be adding into my track. So I'm just gonna press these around and see what I like. Okay, so after hearing it, I think this one is a crash sound. So because the current beat is a bit soft, so I might just add a few more in the drum machine. So to add, you simply just need to click on the boxes. So just customize it however you like first. So I'm just gonna add a bit more. yeah, I just randomly press the keys, right? So after I finish pressing everything, I'm going to see how this sounds like now. Okay, it's giving marching band vibes for some reason, but it's fine, we'll just go with that. So this is basically how you handle the drum track. And now I hope you guys can like just experiment a while for it first. And then I'll add another track maybe after like 3 or 4 minutes. In this period, if you guys have any questions, feel free to just come out and find me or go find Joshua over there. Meanwhile, I'll just continue working on this to make it sound slightly better. Oh, also on a side note, how you switch between different sections or like different tracks within the same track, you just double click on it. For example, I'm currently on the B side. If I want to go back to A, I just double click. And then it changes for me. Hello? Okay. And if you want to rearrange the sections, you just need to click and drag. Yeah. And if you need to delete anything, it's just pressing the delete key. Okay, I hope you guys had some time to experiment with making your own drum beats for a bit first. And this is what I've currently come up with. It's still okay. Yeah, so now that we have drums, maybe it's a good time to add some new instruments in. And in order to add instruments, you once again go to the top left corner and click on the Add Track button. And this time we're gonna click on Virtual Instruments because we wanna add some different instrument into it. It's going to default give me a piano, but to be honest, you can select what you like over here next to the keyboard section over here underneath. If you click on Studio Grand, it will open up a menu and you can select any of the instruments in there. But to make it easier, I'm just going to use the piano, yeah. But yeah, if you want to listen to a sample of what the instrument sounds, you can click on these play buttons and hear. So yeah, this is what upright piano would sound like. Okay, this is what whirly sounds like. Okay, I'm gonna take the grand piano because it is a common instrument. So after I select what I like, you see on the piano's keyboard over here that some of the keys are highlighted with keyboard keys, right? So if I press on the keyboard of the laptop, it will actually make those noise. So I'm gonna press A now and you can see what it sounds like. What is Yeah, so technically for inputs, you can either play by hand on your laptop's keyboard, or you could go into the editor where it's a piano roll.
Or you can also connect a real instrument and play, but like
That's not
outside the
now.
scope.
So if I boringly want to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, I could just do it on my keyboard. Okay, I don't know how the rest of it goes, so I'm not going to continue. But for the sake of making a track, it's better to use something called a piano roll, which was explained just now. And to create one of these in the track that's labeled instrument here, I'm just going to double click on either of the bar sides. Oh, does it not? Wait, how do you?
No. Okay, so
Why am I in automation? Why are you on downloads?
no. It's because you're in automation. That's why you can't do that.
Oh.
Yeah, you first go out automation. That's why you can't.
Okay, yeah, just double click and it should create. Okay, or not.
Okay, like one side note, right? There's different modes for the track here. Don't click on these. If you have these things clicked, right, please unpick them. Otherwise, you can't make a new track. So it's something else. It's not about something called automation. It's outside the scope of today, so advanced tech.
Ah, I found it.
So yes.
So on the bottom left, there's instrument effects and MIDI editor. Go into MIDI editor and you will see this. And now you see there's like a huge piano over here. Yes, it's scrollable, don't worry. You see at the edge there's some that are grayed out. I'm pretty sure the grayed out key are just those noises that cannot be made using a computer because, or like by the instrument itself, because it's actually just the edge of what can be played by the piano. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just gonna stick to the C4 range. So once again, for this, basically you just click on any of the squares and then a note should be put into it. Yeah, and then I'm just gonna and if you don't like where the note's sitting right now, you can feel free to just drag it around. So I'm just dragging it around right now. I'm just randomly going to put stuff in this range because music is sometimes made just like that. And when you just randomly have some things inside your bar or your track, you can just feel free to play the track on top and see how it's going. I'm just going to copy and paste this 4 times to speed up the process. Is everyone following fine? Does anyone need help? Yeah, if anyone needs help, Joshua is free right now. Okay, so after I randomly filled in the bar with notes, I'm going to just play it once and see how it sounds first. Okay, by now, you guys might have realized an issue, and that's how soft the piano sounds, right? So how can I fix this so that the drum doesn't overpower the piano? Go to the left where you see the instrument track list. You can see underneath each instrument there's a bar that you can slide, right? That controls the volume of each separate instrument. So if I want the piano to sound louder, I just need to drag this so that it sounds louder, until it sounds louder. So you see when I drag this, it says something dB, right? dB means decibels. So the higher it is, the louder it gets. And yes, it can go into the negatives. So I'm just gonna turn the drums down and see if it helps. Yes, so I have managed to get the drum track softer, and now I can see if it sounds better now, if it's more balanced out. Okay, it sounds better now. I can hear the piano directly. And oh, by the way, if after mixing all of the separate tracks, you still find it generally a bit soft or a bit too loud, over here near the top right corner, you can see there's a volume bar over here, right? And it says plus 0.0 dB. You can just change this so that its output would be louder or softer. So for my case, I'm gonna push this up a little bit. And let's hear how this makes a difference. Okay, so now it's coming through the speaker louder. It's coming through the speaker louder, right? So if you want to have it in your earphones or in your speakers louder or softer, you can control it over here. Okay, I think we all know how to use the drums or like just create an instrument by now, right? But what if in our songs you don't want to make your own beats or your own harmonies? You just want to use something else or like someone else's. So BandLab also supports that and has a built-in library of all these audio sample files and all that. And you can do that by once again pressing the Add Track button over here on the top left. And then you just add a virtual instrument again. But this time I'm gonna leave it blank. After this, maybe we can go to the bottom right. You see here there's a tab noted BandLab sounds, right? If I click into it, it opens up a library of all the samples that BandLab itself already has. So if I click on a random one, let me just click on this one. You see there's a lot of audio files inside already. And these are all libraries that BandLab has included for your use already. So if I click play on a random one, you can see how it sounds. yeah, so if you're into this stuff, there's no need for you to make it yourself because BandLab already gave it to you. So I'm just gonna randomly drag this in to my audio. And it's gonna ask me for money. Welp. I'm gonna try to... Okay. So the way for it to not ask for you to get money is you see after all your tracks, there's a drop, a loop, or an audio/MIDI/video file here, right? You just click on one of the samples, drag and drop it over there. Then it won't ask for your credit card information. And now I'm just gonna see how it fits in. It's probably gonna sound bad, but I don't mind. Okay, it sounds like a train is approaching, but whatever. So yeah, like you can technically play around with all the samples BandLab gives you and see what fits well into your songs or the songs you want to make as well. So that's basically a very simple overview of how to get started with your own project in BandLab as well. Yeah, so feel free to just create and play around for like 5 to 10 minutes, and in case you guys have like any questions or like want to know more about us or something, you can feel free to just come to us or have us come to you as well. Meanwhile, I'm gonna try to make this sound slightly better, even though... Okay, to be honest, let's have everyone try to make a 4-bar loop. So you see the numbers up here, right? They just mean how many bars or like which bar you're at. If everyone here can manage to make around 4 bars today, then I think you guys are already stellar and have probably mastered or like at least know of the basics of how to make your own music. Give me 1 second. If you guys manage to complete your 4 bars or even longer pieces of music, then you can go to this link and submit your loops. We will play them and everyone can enjoy what you've made tonight after you submit it. So I think we can wait until 8:05 or 8:10. We'll wait until 8:15, really?
Give them like 15 minutes.
Okay. We'll wait until 8:15 for you guys to experiment on what you want to do. And in that time, if you have any questions, feel free to just wave at us or like tell us to come or come to us and we'll be there. To make this better, I'll start with what I made so that y'all can laugh at me before we continue on. Okay, this is what I made just now. Yeah, so I mean it's sound, so it's okay. I at least made a WAV file and I'm proud of that. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next one.
Ooh, this is good. Yo, who made this? Who made this?
If you want to review yourself.
You should be proud of yourself. This is actually pretty good. That is actually pretty good.
With the limited time we had, that is actually quite good. Okay, let's go to the next one.
actually not a bad melody line for like a start of like, you know, for example like a rock track. I can imagine, I can totally picture like a guitar player playing like this melody line while the drum starts up. Okay, I can totally picture like a guitar player playing this melody line while, you know, the drums start up in the background. So yeah, that was not bad as well. Okay, okay, next one. Okay, looks sounds like Luigi mentioned. No, it's actually not bad. Like, okay, this is certainly not a conventional style. But I've done similar stuff before, so yeah, this is actually not bad. Okay, let's just see next one. Ooh, this is pretty good as well. Yeah, it is really good as well. Holy shit, y'all have talent. Y'all should join. Okay, next one. Oh, this is actually not bad also. I can really imagine this like a video game track as well.
A bit tropical, I like it.
Yeah, I was imagining like Mario, you know. Okay, let's see. And now we are back in Luigi's mansion. And this time we are in his basement, in his dungeon. Why is he locked in there? Okay, y'all have talent. Y'all should join. Okay, wait. I want to show them like a demonstration of like, for example, how a completed like file would look like. For example. Yeah, no more extend. Hey, wait, close this first. Close this there. Close their name. Wait.
Your mouse is your mouse is over there.
Oh, my mouse is over there.
You wanna close this, right?
Yeah, just close it.
Okay.
No.
Duplicate. No. Duplicate. It's okay.
Okay, I'm just gonna give a short preface, right? I'm not really the most neat person, so my files tend to be a bit on the messier side, but yeah. So this is how a full DAW would look like. And so for example, this is for example how a full music song file would look like. I actually considering Chromatic Inquisition because it's neater, but whatever. Fire Vengeance is better. Fire Vengeance is a better song. It's okay if we overshoot a bit, right? Yeah, it's not like security's gonna chase us out. Yet. Yeah, but everything takes around like 2 minutes to load. Yeah, okay, so anyways, while that loads up, okay, so yeah, so let's just briefly go over some more stuff first. Okay, so what the? Oh, there we go. Okay, so what you did just now when you added like those instruments, right? In a full DAW, right, you'll be doing this thing called. Okay, right. So for a full DAW, for example, you'll use this thing called plugin. So they are like your instruments from just now. Except that, for example, a lot of these DAWs you have, these plugins you have to download from like the internet or other sources. There are also like effect plugins as well that instead of those pre-built effects that you have from just now, these are like third party and all that. So VST is the format most of them is in. It's called Virtual Studio Technology. It's the industry standard. It's actually compiled to like C++. I mean people do other stuff also, but mainly C++. I mean if you think about it, right, even your Java program is actually secretly C. Everything is C nowadays, actually. Okay, anyways. So, yeah, so, right, next slide. Okay, so if you want to, for example, build like plugin, right, you can obviously use things like Juice or, just like other like C++ programming as well. But there's also this high level thing called like Max or Pure Data, for example. So these things is actually like a visual programming like thing. So let me bring up a picture. Yeah, so for example, right, Max will looks like something like this. So it's like a visual programming language. It's easier to work with than pure, But I mean, Pure Data looks something like that as well. But these are much more like easy to use, and but then again, like, all of them convert to C++ as well. Everything in the world is actually C if you think about it. If you look close enough, everything is C. There's only C, and now you know how to make computer goes beep bop beep bop. The secret to it all is actually C. So anyways, here is our QR code. If you're interested to join us, I was actually quite yeah. Don't worry, there's no like sign up fee or auditions. We are a very free and open club. We're quite focused on our members. Like members are free to make whatever they want. So some of you just now you make some pretty good loops. I would love to see you guys around. Yeah, no prior experience required either. I'll just have this up for like maybe like 1 more minute. I'll close it at 8:30.
If y'all also like performing music that you made yourself, EML provides a good channel for you to do that. Because the songs you produce with us, we will allow, like, we have opportunities for you guys to like perform it live as well. So like, even if you don't have any experience, it's fine. Because our sessions mostly focus on having experienced tutors teach you how to make music from scratch. If anyone's interested, please join.
Oh, actually, even better than that, our mentors are actually quite well connected in the industry. We are not a DJ club, right? But we have produced quite a few very good DJs from our club as well. Any of you have been to Supernova? Any of you went to like NUS Supernova earlier this year? One of the performers, Violet, right? She was actually the 2 presidents before me. So yeah, we produce a lot of musicians who make original tracks. And the thing is like it's essentially like a community. Think of it as like joining a community of like-minded individuals. This is pretty much like the only place in NUS where you can go and make your own music and stuff. Okay.
Okay, to end off the workshop today, we will show you what Joshua produced for like one of our performances last year. And it is a banger. So if you still have 4 minutes, feel free to like stay behind and listen to it.
Is it not working?
No, it's loading. It's loading these. Okay. It's not okay. So it's actually not the neatest. If I had this a bit neater, it would be like 60 channels. I have like 60 plus layers. So
it's just his songs that are insane. Like normally, no one forces you to make 60 different tracks. Mine was only 6. Okay, for reference. Same performance, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, so anyways, it's a pretty complex file. A lot of them have a lot of effects also, but this one sounds like. this is birefringence. Actually, this track was supposed to have vocals, but however, the thing is, I haven't mastered my friend's vocals properly yet. So, yeah. I mean, if you guys want to hear the old vocals version, never mind. Oh my gosh! Okay, wait, give me a moment.
You got time then, and
Run across the road, fragments of my mind cover head to toe. Refraction shooting out from the shards of foes. I don't know what's true, what's the antidote. I see a shadow crawling out of me. Turns out she's the other half of me. Can't believe what's happening. Screaming out with the same way you have to be. Hey. See my own reflection through the lake. I know the barrier is bound to break. Waiting at the crossroads of my mind again. Wonder if the other me is mine to take. I'm trying to persevere through the storm.
sorry, we decided that it's a better idea to show you the actual performance video for this, because otherwise it's kind of strange to listen to a studio recording randomly, right? And it's cooler when you can see them in action.
Track. Guys, this is my track. I'm kind of proud of it, guys.
Low Sorrow by Refringent. Let's go.
The one jumping energetically there is me. I actually enjoy it. I actually had a fun time doing this. Here's the thing, right? It's only cringe when the crowd doesn't jump with you.
Run across the road, fragments of my mind cover head to toe. A fraction shooting out from shards of froze. I don't know what's real, what's the antidote. See a shadow crawling out of me. Turns out she's the other half of me. Can't believe what's happening. Screaming out with the same we have to be. Hey. Through my own reflection through the lake, I know the barrier is bound to break. Waiting at the crossroads of my mind again. Wonder if the other me is mine to take. I'm trying to persevere through the storm. To see the truth behind the falling rain. Who you really are, I need to know. The shining glass spells out your name. I'm a freak chick. Put on a mask, Patron, I can't decide. Everything I say will tell, I just street right, trying to find a bone to pick, like peanuts. I gotta press rewind, look in the mirror, I see on the other side, waving at me was a person I recognize, but I can't remember who it is if I don't try. Through my own reflection, through the lake, I know the barrier is bound to break. Waiting at the crossroads of my mind again. Wonder if the other me is mine to take. I'm trying to persevere through the storm. To see the truth behind the foggy rain. Really, I need to know. The shattered glass spells out your name. Let's go, Rico. How's everyone doing? Everyone having a good time? All right, let's turn the shit up. See my own reflection through the lake. I know the barrier is bound to break. I got the crossroads in my mind again. Wonder if the other me is mine to take. Trying to persevere through the storm. To see the truth behind the falling rain. Who you really are, I need to know. The shattered glass spells out your name. All the time people say that one thing, I don't think they see that I just from the front, there's another me. How to right side, I can never get it out of my stomach, step mind. Another me that I never see, thinking I'll never be. Just out, just say me. Two sides of the same coin, landing on friction, puts the right spot. Everyone make some noise for Violet.
A lot of other genres. Oh, you mean the last part? So this is actually one of our biggest performance of the year. It's called Omniverse. So actually last year we put it under NAF because we thought that, we are bringing so many different talents together, all for a common vision. It's a very artistic thing. But apparently NUS decides it's not. So we are having a performance later next year. It will be under a different venue. It will not be under NAF anymore because, But yeah, we do have our other performances planned for NAF instead. So yeah, we actually have 2 upcoming performances as well. One at YH reopening and one at internal event. But yeah, if you guys want to join, it's a QR code again. But I guess everyone who's interested has pretty much already scanned. Okay, but yeah, to show our different genres, right? We have, for example, this is rap. Yeah, okay, anyways, yeah, actually free to go now, but yeah, just, thanks for coming, but, just for, those who are interested, we do other genres as well, like rap. Trap. Like rock. Like dubstep, like hard bass. Our vice president's very chill performance. Video game music, it's like trance, breakbeat, like alt rock, I'm free. It's peak. This song is peak. I'm free. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyways, yeah, we do a lot of fun stuff as you can see. So okay. Yeah. Anyways, workshop over. Thank you all for coming.